Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a new edition of the HKHDC webinars that we've been conducting over the last few weeks. I hope you can hear us well. Today, we're delighted to have with us Dr. Felix Klein, and I will just do a very brief introduction and then pass over to Consul-General Lamley, and then we will go into the presentation by Dr. Klein. Now, the late British historian Robert Wistrich, he described anti-Semitism as the longest hatred and a lethal obsession. It was and continues to be a potent and dangerous ideology that threatens not only Jewish communities all around the world, but also tears apart the very essence of liberal, pluralist, and tolerant societies. In this webinar today, we will address and analyze the problem of anti-Semitism in Germany and in Europe today. I'm absolutely delighted that we can do so with our distinguished speaker, Dr. Felix Klein, Germany's first commissioner for Jewish life in Germany and the fight against anti-Semitism. Now, this webinar is slightly different from the ones we've had in the recent weeks because it is about the present. And in the past, we've had webinars with survivors, and we're actually planning to have another one coming up very soon with a Romani survivor, which we've never had here before in Hong Kong. We've also spoken about the future by looking at the technology and the memory of the Shoah in our webinar with the director of the Shoah Foundation. Now, it's really a great pleasure, and I'm immensely honored to have with me the Consul-General of Germany here, Dr. Dieter Lamley. I really want to thank him personally and also all your staff at the consulate for making this webinar possible. Without your support and without our collaboration, this really wouldn't have gotten off the ground. So I'm very delighted to have you here. And I would like to invite you to introduce our guest speaker today.
Yeah, thank you very much and good evening, everybody. Welcome to this webinar tonight. And thank you very much, especially to my friend Felix Klein for joining us and to Roland Vogt for organizing this webinar. Let me first present Dr. Felix Klein, the first Federal Commissioner for Jewish Life in Germany and the fight against anti-Semitism. He is the first person in this position. He was appointed to this post in 2018. Why does Germany need such a commissioner? What are his main tasks? I would say his work is dominated by three tasks. First, coordination. He has to coordinate all relevant measures taken by all federal ministries. Second, contact. He is the contact person and liaison for all Jewish individuals or groups to combat anti-Semitism. And third, awareness. He has to raise and maintain awareness of all current and past forms of anti-Semitism. I know him since 2009, since 12 years, when we worked very close together at the German Foreign Ministry. He as assistant to the Vice Minister and I as head of human resources. Both of us are lawyers. Felix studied in Freiburg, Berlin, and London. After our studies, we both entered the German diplomatic service and served abroad in difficult parts of the world. And today, our lives meet again virtually here in Hong Kong. And Felix, I'm very happy that you agreed to participate in this webinar. This year, we are celebrating 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany. That means that we can look back on a very long common history and that we are no strangers to each other. Nevertheless, we need a federal commissioner to fight anti-Semitism. What are the reasons for that? Why are we still facing criminal acts against Jewish persons living in Germany? Haven't we learned the lessons of the past? What could be the role of the ultra-right parties in the upcoming election year in Germany? Felix, I have the questions. You, some of the answers. May I pass the floor to you? And once again, thank you for being with us. Felix, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dieter. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, first of all, I would like to thank you for your invitation and to send you my best wishes, especially to Hong Kong. Of course, it would have been great to do this evening together in person in Hong Kong, but due to circumstances we all know, it's I think also very good and we show our flexibility to do it in this form of a webinar. I'm happy to have this opportunity to be able to give you a brief overview of the development of anti-Semitism in Germany and Europe and how we deal with the phenomenon. Please allow me to explain to you also the specifically German perspective, because Germany has a special role in connection with the subject of anti-Semitism. Dieter has just alluded this fact. Ladies and gentlemen, it has already been said that anti-Semitism is considered to be the oldest resentment, the oldest hatred in Europe, and that in itself, of course, is remarkable. But the Holocaust and with it the extermination of nearly all European Jews is a German act. That is why we, as Germans, feel a very special responsibility for this issue. And although we are seeing increasing anti-Semitism, not only in Germany, but also in other countries in Europe, it has a different quality for Germany. That is because taking responsibility for history does not simply mean that we remember what happened. Rather, it places us under an obligation to nip in the bud any new hate campaigns, whatever their form, against minorities, whether they be Jews, Muslims, or foreigners. What is remarkable in this connection is that Judaism has such a long history in Europe. As it was mentioned by Dieter and Lamley, we are celebrating 1,700 years of Jewish life in our cultural region. And that means that Jewish life has always been part of our society, and that Germany is home to Jews was beyond doubt until 1933. If I name to you just a few well-known historical figures of German Jewish origin, such as Nobel laureate Albert Einstein, the composer Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy, Karl Marx, or the painter Max Liebermann, they were without a doubt respected members of German society. And the list of Jews who made significant contributions could be extended, for example, in the fields of science, art, medicine, and research. Until 1933, for example, no fewer than a third of German Nobel Prizes went to Germans of Jewish origin. At the same time, Jews were, of course, not only intellectuals, but also employees, members of the liberal professions, craftsmen or officials who lived side by side with their non-Jewish neighbors. This normality came to an abrupt halt in 1933 at the latest, the year of Hitler's seizure of power, and with it the beginning of the Nazis' systematic persecution of the Jews. The Holocaust nearly led to the extermination of Judaism, which had been at home in Germany for centuries. 6 million Jews were murdered in Europe alone. That there are Jewish communities in Germany again today is little short of a miracle. And we are grateful that the majority of Jews living in Germany today again understand Germany to be their home, in spite of the fact that the horrors of the past remain unforgotten. Unfortunately, a dark shadow is being cast on this development. Even today, Germany is not free of anti-Semitism. The fact that the same is true for other countries in Europe is no excuse. Rather, we are obliged to recognize that anti-Semitism never went away. Unfortunately, physical or verbal attacks on Jewish people or people perceived to be Jewish are again taking place more frequently in Germany. The statistics on the development of anti-Semitic crimes in Germany show a significant increase. Only a small proportion of these are violent acts. acts, violent crimes. Most of the recorded offenses are so-called propaganda crimes, graffiti, and insults. But that does not diminish the problem, as anti-Semitic crimes are generally an expression of a mindset contemptuous of humanity that should have no place in a civil society, in a civilized society. And one of the main problems we are facing now is also the radicalization in the internet. The perpetrators of Halle and of the Hanau terrorist crime last year, or in 2019, also show that these people have posted propaganda. They were open to anti-Semitism, and in the end they radicalized. They took guns and shot people. So that is also for us to be taken into account, that normally anti-Semitism does not stay in the net. It can develop very, very quickly to violent crimes. Recent studies have shown that radicalization in the internet takes place 4 times more quickly than radicalization offline. And at the same time, though and that has been a key experience during my time in office, I realized that there are many committed people in Germany who do not simply want to stand and watch this development, and who have either already taken up the fight against anti-Semitism or are supporting us in that fight. So that's the positive side of my experience. And in that sense, the creation of my office in 2018 is also a paradigm shift, as it has been mentioned by Consul-General Lamley. Today, the German parliament and the federal government regard Jewish life and fighting anti-Semitism as so important that a commissioner has been tasked specifically with this area. In recent years, we have seen the limits of discourse and the thresholds of hatred and violence in public debate generally lowered still further, particularly online, as well as a shift to the right. And that not only applies to anti-Semitism, of course, we have to bear that in mind, but also to other topics, such as discussions ranging from migration and social issues to questions of future coexistence in Europe. Or if you think of the hatred that is directed against women, against homosexuals, against handicapped people, they suffer actually the same development. But overall, that is an unsettling development, of course, and it has taken on a new quality. There is an increased willingness to use violence against other people. I see this as a clear threat to our entire political and democratic culture. What makes anti-Semitism a special phenomenon in this context is the fact that it draws on diverse, different sources. Anti-Semitism was deeply rooted in so-called Christian anti-Judaism. In simple terms, Judaism was blamed for the death of Jesus, and that the Jews were thus a people of deicides. That has had an impact on society for centuries. I'm glad that meanwhile, the Christian churches are also very committed in fighting anti-Semitism, that they have overcome that. But of course, this century-old hatred has had a tremendous effect on our culture. Then there is so-called racist anti-Semitism. Judaism was seen as a race. The Nazis, with their absurd racial theories, made such ideas part of their ideology and thus the basis of their brutal extermination. So, for instance, for Jews in the 1930s, it was impossible to flee the persecution with conversion to Christian belief with these racial theories. And I'm very happy, of course, that fortunately these racial theories, this ideology plays hardly any role anymore today. What we've seeing increasingly for years, however, is the strengthening of so-called Israel-related anti-Semitism. It calls into question the right of the state of Israel to exist, for example, and even aims to eliminate it. In Germany, Israel-related anti-Semitism is particularly widespread, because the classical anti-Semitism is maybe still outlawed by vast majority of the people. So if you use anti-Semitic sentences, you might face opposition or resistance. But if you call it Israel, if you only use even the code Israel, you might expect much more acceptance, since there's a very critical great part of German society until the middle that have very critical views regarding Israel. And recent studies have shown that 40% of the German people are open to Israel-related anti-Semitism, that they, for instance, agree to sentences like Gaza is like a big concentration camp, or what the Jews do to the Palestinians now is not that different from what the Nazis did to the Jews in the 1930s. So Israel-related anti-Semitism is a big threat to our society, and the global movement Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, BDS for short, a transnational political campaign that aims to isolate the state of Israel economically, culturally and politically, is active in this area. Very much in Germany. I don't know about Hong Kong, but it is quite widespread and supported in particular here in Germany by milieus of the political left. Of course, it is also supported by people who have come to Europe from the Middle East in the wake of refugee movements. An intensive discussion has been underway for some time now on the extent to which such activities are unobjectionable democratic protests against Israeli government policy, which would be absolutely fine, of course. I mean, there are many things that can be criticized, what the Israeli government is doing, particularly when you look at the settlement policy, but very often they cross the borderline and represent a new form of anti-Semitism. A majority of the German Bundestag, our parliament, has made a very clear statement on this subject. They classify the BDS activities as anti-Semitic. And not least, there is a form of anti-Semitism that assumes that Jews per se do bad things. It harnesses conspiracy myths in an attempt to provide an explanation for phenomena that are not understood or are incomprehensible, and to share it with supposedly like-minded people. Almost all conspiracy myths are manifestly or structurally anti-Semitic. The so-called protocols of the Elders of Zion are well-known conspiracy myths, but there are also anti-Semitic myths on the Islamist attacks on the 11th September 2001 in the US, or on migration movements in Europe. So for instance, people say that the migration crisis was organized by American Jews in order to spread Muslim people all over Europe, and idiotic ideas like this. But what these myths have in common is that they can be adapted to diverse ideological, political and religious contexts. A notable aspect here in Germany is that these conspiracy myths have been used in the course of demonstrations over the COVID-19 pandemic by political groups across the right-left spectrum to spread their incitement also against Jews. We are seeing a previously unknown mixture of people coming together to protest against the state-imposed coronavirus restrictions. Right-wing extremists alongside left-wingers and anti-vaxxers, esoterics alongside supposedly religious groups. The demonstrators are united by another shared conviction that a secret elite created the virus and that people are being turned into puppets, for instance. Moreover, the internet favors the spread of conspiracy myths, in many cases linked with anti-Semitic notions of a supposedly Jewish or even Zionist global conspiracy and domination of the world of finance. Thus, the old anti-Semitic narrative of Jewish world conspiracy is once again being adapted to the current situation. This creates a large echo chamber of hate messages. Ladies and gentlemen, all this shows that anti-Semitism is not only centuries old, but unfortunately it's also still present. And that makes me all the more pleased that the great majority of German Jews continue to perceive Germany as their home. But the current development does give cause for concern. I can assure you that we are doing everything to assure that Jews in Germany never again need to feel excluded. What is important, and this is true not only when it comes to fighting the pandemic, is for us to be well equipped and active. And I'm confident that in Germany we have set up the right structures, or apt structures at least, for fighting anti-Semitism more effectively, from appointing anti-Semitism commissioners in the federal states, and in some cases in the judiciary and law enforcement, to establishing a new joint federal and state commission of this issue, to developing a new reporting system to record anti-Semitic incidents, whether they do or not meet the threshold of criminal offenses, to improving counseling services for victims of anti-Semitic attacks. It has been a very positive experience for the past 3 years that political leaders in Germany have become considerably more active on this issue at both the federal and state levels. We can maybe expand on that in our discussion. Anti-Semitism and racism pose a threat to all of us, not only to Jewish people in Europe. That makes it all the more important to have a vigilant and courageous civil society to educate school pupils for democratic citizenship and to maintain a strong culture of remembrance. And this is also what I try to convey to the German public, you know, that the fight of against anti-Semitism does not only is not only for the Jewish community, but for all of us. Anybody can be a victim of a Jewish and of an anti-Semitic attack. It's only if you're perceived to be a Jew, or as the attack in Halle showed, that at the end of the day of the attack of Halle, 2 non-Jewish people were then victims of this anti-Semitic attack. So it can hit anybody. Of course, and I think one element in our culture of remembrance should be that the Jewish community should not be represented exclusively as victims of the Shoah. Instead, there should be greater public awareness of the diversity of Jewish life and its natural place in our society. For many centuries, Jewish community have been an integral part of our German and European societies. And if I recall only my old days at school, we knew about Judaism only when the Nazi period was on in our history class. And of course, immediately you see and perceive the Jewish community as the victims of the Nazis, as a problematic group. But we have not been at all acquainted to these integral parts and performances Jews have done for our society. Ladies and gentlemen, for a few years now, the fight against anti-Semitism is increasingly taking place online. In light of this, the German Parliament has passed a new act to fight right-wing extremism and hate crime this summer, which is yet another important tool for combating anti-Semitism. In part, the new law just passed by the Bundestag obligates major social network providers not only to delete the death threats, incitements to violence and other punishable content that are frequently posted on social media, but also to report them. To handle these reports, the Federal Criminal Police Office is setting up a central office to combat criminal offenses online, especially hate crime, more effectively. A clear legal basis for providers to disclose information to law enforcement authorities is being established so that suspects can be identified and evidence can be collected. Actually, some cases, pilot projects have shown that this milieu, these people who spread anti-Semitism in the net, actually react when they counter and when they face resistance, when the police car is in front of their door, when the prosecutor is investigating, then they are actually impressed, and that gives me a big hope that with this new legislation we will actually have a good tool in the fight against anti-Semitism. Furthermore, in November 2020, the Cabinet Committee to Fight the Right-Wing Extremism and Racism adopted an extensive package of measures comprising a total of 89 individual projects. This marks a real milestone in the fight against right-wing extremism. But of course, we all know that there is no patent remedy for the fight against anti-Semitism. But it is my conviction that education, information, and remembrance of the Holocaust are very central areas of activity where vital work needs to be done and is being done in Germany. We must show where exclusion of minorities can lead. Ultimately, it can lead to mass murder, as we have seen in the Holocaust. It is also important that everyday encounters take place between people who hold different worldviews and who come from different cultures. And it is important to promote such encounters in mutual respect. The more it is a matter of course and normal for people to get along with one another, the more difficult it is for those who wish to divide society. That is how, in the long term, we can drain the breeding ground on which hatred and incitement thrive. Achieving this not only requires the support of policymakers, but also, of course, civil society organizations that breathe life into these principles, like your organization, the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center. Like you, such organizations focus on close cooperation with schools, universities, NGOs, and cross-denominational religious groups in their work on the Shoah, raising awareness of tolerance and taking a critical approach to evaluating the past. We support such activities in Germany, partly with public funding. I hear that you finance yourselves exclusively through donations. I would like to express my special respect and thanks to you for your commitment and your activity. I thank you for this vital work, and I'm happy that we have an opportunity to discuss now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for these remarks. Before we proceed to the Q&A, I would like to just have just a brief housekeeping point. For those participants who like to ask questions, if you go down to your screen, you will see there's a Q&A function. So if you want to ask questions, please use that button to ask questions, and do not use the chat, because the chat is really reserved for some technical matters. So what we will try to do is to sort of maybe to collect a few questions, and then we can ask Dr. Klein to answer them. So let me begin by asking you, so you are the inaugural commissioner, and of course your own work is basically like you make the job on the go because there's no precedent for it. I wanted to ask you, so what challenges have you encountered? What was sort of like unexpected or unforeseen that you did not thought that you would encounter in your job as you sort of go along? Are there any stories or insights you can share with us?
Well, you just mentioned it's a particularly challenge to be the first of your kind, so there's no experience. And that, of course, was also one of the reasons why I accepted the job with pleasure, because, of course, you're setting the benchmarks yourself, of course. And first of all, of course, it was a big threat for me to establish these structures I've mentioned. I started right away only with one secretary, and then it said, so Mr. Klein, go and fight against anti-Semitism with one secretary. That was pretty impossible. So the experience that they have done is when you go. So I went to to Parliament and to, of course, all the ministries. And if you ask them to help you in the fight against anti-Semitism, everybody says immediately yes, of course. But when you become concrete, then you face difficulties. So, for instance, I said, look, I need staff. I can't do it on my own. So, of course, and that was immediately the first fight in the ministry I'm placed now, in the Ministry of the Interior. It was a big fight in the beginning. And Dieter Lamle knows that diplomats, people from the Foreign Service have a special reputation in other ministries, particularly the Ministry of the Interior. So I had to overcome some prejudice against diplomats. And in the end, though, I was successful. I have now a staff of 11 people. And I also, the experience that some of the people within government structures, they have some difficulty in accepting these new structure. So I'm not, I forgot to say that actually, I'm not part of the hierarchy of the ministry. So I'm independent as a government commissioner. So I can, in spite of the fact that the ministry I work in has a certain position, I can have another position. And this is what I did several times. So for instance, when it came to the fact that many descendants of German Jews now apply once again to German citizenship, particularly after the Brexit. It is attractive for many descendants of German Jews to have an EU citizenship. And the Ministry of the Interior had a very complicated bureaucratic procedure how descendants of German Jews could regain or reapply for German citizenship. And so I was against it, and I made a public statement and criticizing the ministry I work for, and I supported a motion of opposition parties, the Greens and the Liberals, who had a much better approach to this. And this was not very, of course, I didn't become popular, as you can imagine, but the minister actually itself, Minister Seehofer, supported me and said, look, this is his task, and he defended me. In the end, now we have a very good legislation for this. So this was the general experience I did. People are very open when and abstractly you talk about the fight against anti-Semitism, and then when you really want to change structures, then it becomes difficult. And I've just given you one example.
I would like to ask you, because you mentioned briefly the situation currently with the pandemic and the demonstrations that are taking place against the restrictions and the disruption to ordinary life that is taking place. I mean, many people are worried, some people are angry, and we've seen in these demonstrations, not only in Germany, but in other parts of Europe as well, that it's like suddenly there's all these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, iconography, symbols are reappearing. How worried are you? I mean, is this really like sort of like now the floodgates are open again to a new kind of anti-Semitism, and in particular, publicly visible anti-Semitism in Europe?
Well, I was not surprised that the anti-Semitism that we've seen a rise of anti-Semitism after the pandemic. History has shown that in times of crisis, the Jews suffer. That it is very common, and I've alluded that in my talk that anti-Semitic and anti-Judaistic traditions are so common in our culture that it is quite of normal, or that is no surprise, at least, to make someone responsible for all that evil, for all that what happened. And so it was only a question of time that this well-known pattern of anti-Semitism once again could be used to blame the Jews for what's going wrong. It was 5 years ago, it was the migration crisis, 11th of September. So that was not a big surprise. But what is worrying actually is the new alliance we are seeing now in the demonstrations, the protesters, people who normally would have never ever anything in common and would never have any contact, now are marching alongside, side by side, in their fight against the measures, which is fine. I mean, it's a democratic right to go and make a demonstration, but they are united with many anti-Semitic narratives. So they make a few people responsible for something that's going wrong. Angela Merkel is being called a Jew, and she also is being made responsible by these people that she is a member or a puppet of the Jews. This is typical for anti-Semites, that they make themselves, that they look at themselves as victims, you know, and that they justify all the measures they have, and at the same time they are using anti-Semitic symbols and trivialize the Holocaust. So there have been we've seen the use of the yellow star Jews have to wear in the 1930s and 40s. People wear them and they compare themselves to the victims of the Holocaust, because they say they suffer as much as the Jews did in the 1930s and 40s in the situation of the pandemic. So this is or we have had a young lady who compared herself to Sophie Scholl, a resistance fighter of the Nazis. And by this absolutely offending and really trivializing the suffering of the people who suffered in the Nazi period. So we've seen there another shift. So what is worrying is that you have an alliance of these people, and you have also people from the left joining them, esoterics, as I say, anti-Semitism is one of the binding forces between those groups. And this is new, and our intelligence services have to react on that. So I'm very happy that I spoke to the president of the intelligence service here for Germany, Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, and now he accepted that the intelligence service observes these people because they have a direct anti-democratic and really threatening potential to be that can be very dangerous. And we see now these days a further radicalization of these groups.
I would like to take some questions from our chat that we're getting here, from the Q&A function. So the first one is here: how do you balance the importance of free speech with the pressure to ban Nazi symbols and hate speech, for instance, on social media? So what does that balance look like? You alluded to the new legislation that is being put in place to force providers to, but that's a very careful balance between the freedom of expression on the one hand and of course hate speech on the other.
Yeah, of course. I mean, freedom of speech is a very, very high value in any democracy, and of course, and we have to accept also difficult opinions, of course. But there's anti-Semitism as such, by the way, is protected by the freedom of speech. You know, I don't like it, but it's not punishable by under German law. So we have to accept even difficult opinions. But I think the freedom of speech has, though, its limits, because first of all, when we speak about anti-Semitism, it is also a value in our constitution that human dignity, freedom of religion, and the right of minorities are also a value. And there's certain limit, I think, in any society when you commit a crime with your opinion. And we have had really long discussions in Germany in the 1990s where to push it. So, for instance, Holocaust denial and distortion is punishable under German law. Also, the incitement of the people is a clear offense, and there we see a clear limit of the freedom of speech. So if you commit a crime with your opinion, then of course it's clear that there's a certain limit. The Federal Constitutional Court has accepted that implementation of this, for instance, of that law banning Holocaust denial is acceptable under the German constitution. So I think there the limit is of course there, and of course if you call for the murder of somebody else, that's a clear offense. I mean, I think there we shouldn't discuss. And I think though well, in Germany we have a particular responsibility for that, especially in particular when we talk about trivializing the Holocaust, and on the European level, which we might discuss further on. I support initiatives where we try to establish common borderlines in European countries, because there are up till now things that are punishable under or forbidden under German law are, for instance, allowed under Italian law, you know, and that of course should be an equilibrium of that. And I work with the current Portuguese presidency to establish also structures on the European level.
Another interesting question we got here deals with what was the reception of the Jewish communities in Germany to the creation of your post? Was this seen as a genuine effort to help the Jewish community, or was it seen sort of like as a sort of political window dressing or a marketing gimmick? So what was their reception like, and what is your relationship with the Jewish leaders and their organizations in Germany?
Well, the Central Council of Jews in Germany for many years called for the establishment of such a position. And we had expert groups being established by the Bundestag, who also advised the government to establish this position. So it's a long story. And in the end, when the decision was taken to establish that function, the Jewish community, by and large, was very happy, and of course, at the same time, though, they had an incredible expectation level of what I should do. And the first thing I did is, of course, I said I'm on one hand, of course, a contact person of what Dieter Lamle said. I'm a contact person. I advise Jewish groups what to do when they want to have an initiative and so on. But at the same time, I immediately made it clear that I'm not only in office for the 100,000 Jews in Germany, but for the whole society, for the 82 million people living in Germany, because anti-Semitism is something you see in the middle of society. The level of anti-Semitism is very high, particularly in regions in Germany where there's no Jew. And these people are my clients too, you know. So I have to fight. I'm there for the German society to overcome that. And so that was a difficult task. On one hand, for the Jewish community to accept that, of course, my task is also to sensibilize the non-Jewish population, because, you know, anti-Semitism is not a problem, not a general problem for the Jewish population. I mean, they suffer because of anti-Semitism, but they know very well about anti-Semitism. So, so the expectation was very high, and then I also right away made a very active press work and tried to also give interviews, challenge, sometimes even also controversial interviews, but I did it on purpose in order to, you know, to show that nothing is fine in Germany regarding anti-Semitism. And this is also what I told the Chancellor and the Minister of the Interior, that I'm not there in order, you know, to be a recipient, or that someone, that the political class and the government can convey the fight against anti-Semitism on my shoulders, and that they don't have anything to do with it anymore. I said, no, it's the other way. I asked government ministers and parliamentarians to do more. So I'm not a delegate for anti-Semitism where the problem leads. So though I'm in regular contact, of course, with the different Jewish groups, most important is, of course, the Central Council of Jews in Germany. And very often we have common initiatives when, for instance, we suggest new legislations, also new programs. It is very, very good that we are in contact and that the Central Council follows that initiative on one side and I do it within the government in the other.
Another interesting question that we got here is concerns the Islamist anti-Semitism, which is of course a challenge. I mean, like Germany, post-war Germany has fought neo-Nazi and right-wing extremism since the very establishment of the Federal Republic. But now these new forms of anti-Semitism have crept up. You mentioned the left-wing anti-Semitism and the Islamists. And the question that we got here is directed at that. What is being done to control and limit the spread of Islamist anti-Semitism? Are there any particular initiatives or what kind of challenges does that pose?
First of all, I would like to stress that any form of anti-Semitism is dangerous. There is no harmless form of anti-Semitism. I've mentioned some forms, the left-wing, inherent right-wing, and the Islamist is a new form, of course. And it is, although when you look at the crime statistics, Islamist perpetrators are not very not very high represented. It's around 3 to 4% of the criminal offenses, criminal anti-Semitic offenses are committed by Islamist perpetrators. Having said that, of course, even the 3 or 4% are absolutely unacceptable and dangerous. We have to deal with them. And first of all, of course, we included prevention programs in the integration courses for refugees. So in the German classes or in the courses the refugees had to follow, they had to follow a unit regarding the fight against anti-Semitism that is absolutely unacceptable in German society to be anti-Semitic. And if you want to become a successful member of German society, it is not accepted to spread anti-Semitic talk. And this is particularly important because the people who came to Germany from the years 2015 or 16 are educated in countries where the hate towards Jews and hatred towards Israel is very common. You know, that in countries like Iraq or Syria, they're even in a state of war still with Israel. And these people, if they want to become successful members in German society, they have to know that it is not, you don't become popular when you do incitement against Israel. So that was the first thing, and many of them have understood that. And we see at the crime statistics that works well. But of course, you have to reach them also not only with a penal code and with punishment, but also with positive messages. And we are very happy that many Muslim communities, mosques, they join us even of course in the integration work, including the fight against anti-Semitism. Also, we have a dialogue. The Ministry of the Interior has a dialogue with many Muslim organizations. I'm also a member in that dialogue. It's an institutional Deutsche Islamkonferenz, a German Islam conference. And we talk about the fight against anti-Semitism there too. And I'm very happy that there's a big support also from within Muslim communities to point out to Muslim people to do that. That is fine. But of course, there are still problems we have. We have Islamist culture centers like the one in Hamburg, for instance, that is directly linked to the regime of the Iran. And you have Islamist anti-Semitism being spread from there, and it's a very, very complicated, complicated story to deal with that form of anti-Semitism. Also, to give you another concrete example, once a year here in Berlin, we have a big demonstration being organized by Islamists where they call for the abolition and the end of the state of Israel, the so-called Al-Quds March. And you can imagine me as the commissioner for the fight against anti-Semitism. I think it is unacceptable that we allow this demonstration to happen in the center of Berlin on the Kurfürstendamm, where many Jewish shops were in the 1930s and 40s, where Jews were also were victims of the Nazis, to allow people to shout against Jews, and to shout for the end of Israel is for me unacceptable, and I'm in a dialogue with the authorities of Berlin. How can we deal with that problem? But there you see also we are we have the rule of law, and to limit the activities of any group, also religious group, of course, is not so easy. So it's a constant dialogue, and also constant initiative. Maybe one last thing is what now is what is being now discussed is to have the imams being trained and educated here in Germany. You know, that we establish the training program for young people who want to become religious Muslims in Germany itself. Because, for instance, now when you're a member of the Turkish community in Germany, you want to become an imam, you can't follow a course here in Germany. You need to go back to Turkey. We don't know what's being told to them there, and then they come back and become imams here in the mosque. So it's much better to establish German university courses for the training of imams here. This is what we do with the priests in the Christian circumstances, and also with the rabbinical seminars. So we have to do, and that I think on the long term, we will fight Islamist forces with that too.
You want to ask a question also?
Yeah, Felix, it's a pleasure listening to you, and you are having a really tough job at the moment. I just want to have two brief questions concerning awareness to Holocaust. The witnesses are dying. For young people, this is not part of their daily perception, and also including my children, it's not automatic that they know something about Holocaust. So what do you do to keep the memory alive in the German society? What is the government doing to do more to keep this memory alive? And then directly related to this, I was very impressed by the different forms of anti-Semitism that you mentioned, and the reason for this forms of anti-Semitism, there are a lot of reasons, but one is definitely the wrong perceptions that are spread, misinformation, negative sentiments instead of facts. So what do you and the government put against this? Do you have information campaigns in school? I know that school matters are things of the matters of the Bundesländer, but still, are you information enlightenment to all this very dangerous perceptions and dangerous spreading of and misleading information? What do you do against this?
Yeah, well, the two questions are really very linked to each other, and because with the two, what you did, you of course have to get the logical, the brain of the people, but also you have to touch their hearts, their sentiments. So, and this is how we try to develop a remembrance culture that creates empathy, and that of course informs about the facts, what happened, but also that creates empathy. And as you said, the last victims, or the last survivors of the Holocaust will not be with us for a very long time anymore. So we need to find new forms of remembrance culture, and I see the memorial sites will get a greater importance than because they are the last authentic places of history, and we have very good programs with the memorial sites. So first of all, they do the most obvious. They ask not only the survivors, but the children of the survivors to get the tours to go to the schools, etc. Because at least they can explain to the school children of what happened to their fathers or mothers, what they had to suffer in the Holocaust, and how it also the sufferance passed to them as children. So that is one obvious thing. Then what I think is important to create authentic projects. So for instance, now we have very good programs that make it very concrete of what happened in the Holocaust. So when you hear, for instance, 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, of what I did, it's very abstract, 6 million people. But but when you expand on a personal biography of someone, a schoolgirl, for instance, a girl that was in the school that exists today, and for instance, a class of that school comes to a memorial site, and they say, look, Anna Braun was in 1938 a Jewish schoolmate of yours, and then these school classes they get a project trying to find out what happened to that girl, whether she was killed or whether she emigrated, and so on. So to make it very concrete, also it is very important that the memorial sites go and don't only wait for the people to come to the memorial sites, but they have mobile units. They come with a bus, for instance, to small towns in the area, and they inform the schools or in the political education what happened in the 1930s and 40s in the village they are going, and they show the places where Jews, for instance, were kind of gathered before they were deported and so on. So to make it very concrete and also to show to the German public how much we are still influenced by the Nazi past. It's just amazing. The architecture, the way many things work. It's just so to help with the awareness raising. And of course, we in order to get the young people, it's very attractive to also to get the new media, so to have interactive forms, to have even games. We have a great game in the gaming scene, who developed a very good game in order how to memorize the Holocaust. So for instance, the game is that you are living in the 1930s and you're part of the resistance in Germany, and you have to escape the Nazis, and you have to hide a Jew and so on. So there are very good ideas also with the new technologies in order to get the interest of the younger generation, and that links me. So you have to have a good combination between, of course, regarding the facts and informing, and also to add something that creates emotion and empathy. And that brings me to your second question. Of course, we need to make it more known that Jews are just normal people like you and I. They're not even more intelligent or richer or stupider. They're as everybody else. So it has to be, we have to overcome that fatal perception of Jewish life being something foreign to German culture, to European culture. It is a normal fact. And even today, people think that Jews should go to Israel or so. You know, that so Jews and Israelis are some completely different groups. And so how we do it, that we have projects. One is called Meet a Jew, where young Jewish students go to schools, invited to schools where there's no Jew, and so they inform everybody in a big audience which music they like, what they eat in the morning, how they spend their evening. So also to show that it's just a normal thing to be Jewish, So we have to create possibilities to meet Jews, to get acquainted to Jewish culture. Of course, this is difficult. We have 100,000 Jews in Germany being organized in the communities, and maybe another 100,000 that are not. So 200,000 for a population of 82 million. It's a bit difficult to meet a Jew actually in Germany, but we have to create possibilities. So this is why we use this jubilee of 1,700 years Jewish life in Germany for a whole series of initiatives, concerts, exhibitions, talks, in order to make an offering, or in order to offer to the German public to get to know Jewish life, because if you know something, you can respect it, and the prejudice is going down. So, but this is a never-ending task, and unfortunately, as I said, we haven't overcome anti-Semitism. But I think the ground perception is to get rid of that perception that Jewish life does not really fit to Germany or so.
I want to, in the interest of time, if you allow me, to bundle a question together. And because we're having quite a number of questions here in the Q&A, and as I want to get us through as many as we can, but so one deals with, like, is there any connection between anti-Semitism and the level of education? Does it mean that people with lower education, are they more prone to anti-Semitism, or is anti-Semitism found everywhere? That's one question. The other question deals with, now that we have a substantial rise in political right-wing extremism that has also made inroads in Germany, is there any danger that people who serve in the army or in the law enforcement, that they are starting to be to have anti-Semitic prejudices or something like that? Do we see any danger of that? Do we basically see, like, so more people, is support stronger for the AfD among soldiers or the police officers? Is this an issue?
Well, it has been subject of a bigger political debate over here in Germany. Minister Seehofer did not consent to make a survey on that, on the right-wing structures in the German police, for instance. Now, in the end, he did consent to it, because he said, well, we have to make a survey in many groups, not only the police. So we have now surveys in many groups, not only the police, but it is a matter of fact, and I can't deny it, or we cannot deny it, that there are networks in some in some police structures, even in the Federal Criminal Office, Bundeskriminalamt. We've just seen several cases that have been made public yesterday. So it is a problem. I wouldn't say that it is inherent and systematic. I wouldn't go that far, but we have to be proactive about that. So what we have to establish is, and I work in that very, very much, to include an element in the training of any police, of intelligence forces, and also in the army, an element on how to discern anti-Semitism, and an element of remembrance culture. So that is absolutely crucial, and it is not yet systematically done. Also, the fight against anti-Semitism very often stops because anti-Semitism as such is not being recognized, it's not being discerned. But the police, prosecutors, also soldiers, they should know when something is to be judged as anti-Semitic or not. So this is why we now have it compulsory in the police training in Germany, upon my initiative, to teach the working definition of anti-Semitism, and also some cases of what that does. And there we have really seen very, very interesting development on how that can be. For instance, last November, on the 9th of November, where we commemorate the night of the broken glass, Reichskristallnacht, so-called. We have had in a police school of Munich, and the Bavarian young police officers, they read out the reports the police gave on the night of the 9th of November 1938 that proves and showed the whole failure of how the police worked and how the police acted in 1938 in order to show the moral disaster of what a policeman can do or can be able not to do in order to protect people. And with these projects and events, you can train the police or even the army, this structure, in order to make them more sensitive regarding anti-Semitism. This is one thing, but another thing is also absolutely clear. In any case of anti-Semitism, has to be followed up, and the Minister of Defense, Mrs. Kramp-Karrenbauer, has immediately thrown out these people who did right-wing chats, etc., within their group. This cannot be accepted anymore, and so it has to be a double strategy. On one hand, very consequent and harsh and straight reactions on when any form of anti-Semitism is being manifested, but on the other hand, of course, training, and with this mixture, I hope that we can go on, but I think we cannot deny the problem. Yes, and I expect more cases to be more to come up, actually. And there's the other question, whether education makes yourself immune against anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, you can't really make a general rule for that. I mean, you have, of course, anti-Semitism in highly sophisticated, highly educated circles, people who know very well how to place these things. But of course, still education is a tool we have to use, of course, and in order to get over the right information and the values, etc. But unfortunately, we've seen that many of the anti-Semites of today are unfortunately well-educated people, and they do on purpose use anti-Semitic narratives, particularly when it comes to Israel-related anti-Semitism, BDS. Also, the left-wing anti-Semitism is very, very subtle. Very often in universities you can find them, and so unfortunately there's no direct link between education and anti-Semitism.
There's another interesting question here that deals with you. What if you look at your own tasks and responsibilities, you probably suffer quite a number of setbacks and hurdles and obstacles. What sustains you? What motivates you to keep doing this, in particular when in a phase where you say like the frequency and maybe also the intensity of anti-Semitic incidents is growing? Like what sustains your own motivation to keep persisting in this work?
Well, first of all, because I've seen concrete successes of concrete things I've suggested are implemented. This is a tremendous satisfaction, actually. So I've suggested that we get new legislation in the penal code, that we establish structures, and it has. I mean, I could convince Parliament and government to do so. Or when it comes to remembrance culture, actually, it's interesting. I've called for the abolition of our name law in Germany, because just to give you an example, the name law in Germany was a law that was introduced in 1938, and that was the law that forced Jews to have first names. So any Jewish men had to have the second name Israel, and the women Sarah. And of course, and that was a law with a clear anti-Semitic approach, of course, And of course, that rule was abolished in 1945 after the end of the Nazi period, but the law as such was still in place, And I suggested, look, we cannot tolerate a law with such a motivation being enforced in Germany in the year 2020. And so I called for that. And now we have a new name law, of course, where all these old notions of, they talk about the Reichsminister des Inneren and the Reichsregierung, they have all been abolished. And so I have had a change there. So to come back to your question, yeah, I can, it's a tremendous satisfaction that we see it's possible that our society gets rid of the things that we can fight discrimination with that, establishing structure. So fighting discrimination, I think, is something that gives you an inherent motivation. Of course, it's absolutely it's necessary to do so also as a citizen. I would say so. I'm not Jewish, so I think I don't do this for for an own group or for my own interests, but I think it's important to do something for the society, and this gives me a great satisfaction, and I also see that it is possible once again to overcome very negative developments and things, in spite of the fact that, of course, with these new forms of anti-Semitism, you get new challenges, but this is something not so unknown, Dieter, also for us diplomats, new challenges are something we are used to. So all in all, I'm quite, it sounds a bit stupid. I'm satisfied, or I think it's important, and but I'm motivated to go on with my work.
One last question. Do you think in general, if we feel, we see there's a lot of debate about anti-Semitism, about hate crimes, about racism, about misogyny, about Islamophobia, do you think European societies in general, are they becoming less tolerant somehow? Or is this just a consequence that already Europeans have learned to become more vigilant and pay more attention to these dangers than in the past?
I think the forms of this intolerance were always there. Now, with the social media, with the brutalization of the political discourse, not only in Europe, but also in the US and other parts of the world, people dare to say what they previously only had in their mind. So things that were there for the past decades are become more visible. And people, so in my case, people who had anti-Semitic thinking in their minds did not dare to express it. It was always there, but now they dare to do it. But they were, I think, as intolerant today as they were maybe 10 years ago. So what is, I think, most important is to shift back these red lines back to where they were. It's very difficult, of course, but I think also with the international and European efforts together, we can do so. And I'm also positive and optimistic that we have enough allies in the middle of society. I mentioned the churches, but also many other forces in society that have known and realized how important it is to get the right direction. Also, of course, journalists, TV stations, etc., have to contribute in that respect, and that we go and try to turn that development. Once again, I think there's no excuse that not only in Germany we see a rise of anti-Semitism and less tolerance. You see it everywhere. In Europe, the pandemic is a special factor for this, but in our societies we have also shown that we are able to overcome very negative phenomena. If you think, for instance, the hatred towards France and to what is French in Germany was centuries old. And Erbfeindschaft, you know, there was even a stupid concept that you inherit the enemies of your fathers and ancestors, and they are also in the West against the French. I think nobody in Germany is anymore has hatred towards France. No, it's absolutely impossible. And so we've seen that we are able to overcome that. And why shouldn't we be able to do this with anti-Semitism too?
Wonderful. I think this is a great note to end. I want to, on behalf of the University of Hong Kong, of the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center, and on the, I want to thank you, Dr. Klein. I want to thank you, Consul General Lamley, for supporting and organizing this this webinar. And I want to thank all our attendees for attending and for asking questions. In fact, there's still a number of questions there on the chat we can't get through. We would be still sitting here in an hour. And but thank you so much for talking to us to Hong Kong and for taking time. And it was very, very good to hear your insights and give us motivation to persist in our educational mission.
Thank you very much for your interest and all the best.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.